Hey guys, today I want to talk about which is the best camera for wedding videography. I'm convinced that I have found it, so I'm really excited to talk about it in this video. Now, I spent several months seeking out a perfect upgrade for my Lumix GH5. I researched countless hours before making the jump to a new setup. The contending cameras I came down to were these: the Canon R6, R5, and C70, the Lumix S5 and S1H, the Fujifilm X-T4, Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro, and the Sony a7S III and FX3. Now, I found out after some time that none of these cameras were exactly what I was looking for. And honestly, I don't know if the perfect camera exists. But I set my mind to find one that ticked a majority of my boxes. So I wrote down 20 necessary characteristics of my ideal camera. Before I share with you what they were, I want to let you know how each of these cameras ranked out of the 20 characteristics I wrote down. R6, 11 out of 20, R5, 13 out of 20, and the C70, 18 out of 20, S5, 11 out of 20, S1H, 13 out of 20, T4, 9 out of 20, 6K Pro, 12 out of 20, a7S III, 16 out of 20, and the FX3, 18 out of 20. As we see, the top two contenders, Canon C70 and the Sony FX3, both tied at having 18 out of 20 of the characteristics that I wanted in an ideal camera. So this narrowed my choices way down to which camera had the most valuable characteristics that I wanted and the overall cheaper price. Now, spoiler alert, I'll just tell you straight up which camera I chose. I ended up choosing the Sony FX3. My only main hesitation about this camera was that it does not have internal ND filters like the C70 has. And the other thing that I was worried about will probably get fixed in a firmware update coming soon. So when I compare the prices of $3,900 for the FX3 and $5,500 for the C70, it was a no-brainer to go with the FX3. Now, before you go anywhere, I want to relay to you the list of essential characteristics I made. Now, though these characteristics apply specifically to wedding and event videography, they're extremely important for all other types of filmmaking as well. Let's jump into what the ideal camera must have. First things first, it must be compact. I'm sure you guys can relate to having sore wrist from a long day of shooting, so this is why I wanted a camera that was compact and lightweight enough that I wouldn't get exhausted from holding it. The FX3 is the perfect balance of being light at 715 grams while not being too light that it's hard to stabilize your camera while holding it. Being such a compact design, Sony added multiple mounting holes all around the camera body, and it's all held together by a lightweight magnesium alloy body that can withstand any condition. Secondly, the camera needed weather sealing. I live on the west coast of Canada and it rains here a lot, so it's essential for me to have a camera that can hold up in pouring rain. This is something that I cannot live without, and the FX3 lives up to that call. Sony made this body dust and moisture sealed, and it's never failed on me. Now, the third reason, the camera must be able to film in 4K, 422 10-bit at 60 frames per second. Color grading is really important to me, so I needed a camera that would be extremely flexible in post. Having this much information in 4K is definitely a game changer, and it's a big enough reason for me to choose this camera for wedding videography. Not only can this camera reach this depth in 60 frames per second, but also in 120 frames per second. So many cameras do not have this ability. Number 4, the camera must be able to film in a log profile. Shooting a log profile will always produce the widest dynamic range and color reproduction, and the FX3 nails this out of the park. The colors are absolutely beautiful. Now, a lot of wedding videographers shoot in standard profiles, but that is quite limiting. I used to film the same way with some of my previous cameras, but I never could manipulate the colors exactly how I wanted them to be. Filming in Sony's S-Log3 with the S-Gamut3.Cine color space produces the most beautiful image in this camera. Reason number 5 is great dynamic range. The FX3 has 15 plus stops of dynamic range, which is incredibly wide. Having this many stops for wedding videography is really important. We go from shooting in extremely bright conditions to extremely dark conditions all the time. I knew I couldn't buy a camera that wasn't able to retain details in the shadows and the highlights. Having this much dynamic range is essential for wedding filmmaking. Reason number 6, the camera must be full frame. The GH5 that I had sucked in low light. The reason for this was that it had a tiny micro four thirds sensor. So my ideal camera had to be full frame to capture more light, and the FX3 is incredible in low light. It has dual based ISO at 640 and 12,800. During receptions and dancing, I always bump the ISO up to 12,800 and the image stays incredibly clean. It's almost unbelievable how great this camera is in low light. So reason number 7, I needed a camera that could produce beautiful skin tones. Given that wedding videography focuses so much on the couple, I needed a camera that can translate skin tones accurately and beautifully. I've always loved Panasonic skin tones, so I was tempted to go for the S1H, but the camera also has so many other downsides that it wasn't worth seeking out any further. And then there's Canon. Canon has beautiful skin tones, but the R6 and the R5 both overheat, so I couldn't trust those cameras. Now Sony just came out with updated colors in this camera and they look really great. Another thing that Sony updated is their menu. For years people criticized them for their poor menu, so recently they came out with a new menu that is quite intuitive. I really love their new menu system and it only took a few hours to get used to it. And this is really important for wedding videographers because we don't have time to mess around with confusing menu systems. Reason number 9 is custom functions. The FX3 has 6 customizable buttons, which is perfect for accessing all your essential settings with just one click. This will reduce the time it takes because you no longer have to go through the menu to change the setting you want. I've strategically configured all these buttons for run and gun shooting, so let me know in the comment section if you want me to make a video about this. Okay, reason number 10 is battery life. Many wedding filmmakers have opted to use external battery sources because not many cameras have great battery life, and on a wedding day we can't afford to keep switching batteries every 30 minutes. If that was the case, we would miss important moments. Having long battery life was a top priority for me, and the FX3 does not disappoint. On a typical wedding day, 2 batteries last the entire day. It's only on rare occasions that I actually have to use a 3rd battery. The FX3 can continuously record for over 2 hours straight. Moving on to the 11th reason, and this reason is so important, the camera must have dual card slots. Guys, never ever film a wedding with a camera that only has 1 card slot. I've honestly been so shocked about the number of filmmakers that only use a camera with 1 card slot. It's a huge risk to film this way and there's no way you can make it up if your card fails. This is why the FX3 is so great. Not only does it have dual SD card slots, but it also has dual CF Express Type A card slots. These Type A cards are designed for high bitrate filming, which you'll need if you're recording in 4K 120 frames per second. Now before I bought this camera, I was really worried that I'd have to spend over $1,000 to buy these CF Express cards to support the FX3's high bit rates. But luckily, if you're recording in 4K 60 frames per second or lower, these SanDisk Extreme Pro cards are the best bang for your buck. I'll link them in the description below. Reason number 12 is IBIS. Coming from the GH5, I can't imagine filming a wedding without in-body image stabilization. This is an indispensable feature that I'll always need. Considering I generally film handheld, having the FX3's 5-axis stabilization gives me the confidence to film without a gimbal. Pairing the IBIS with an optically stabilized lens, and when you have the active stabilization turned on, you can achieve gimbal-like filming all while shooting handheld. Now, essential characteristic number 13 is autofocus. I pride myself with being really great with manual focus, but there are some moments throughout a wedding day where autofocus is essential. With the GH5, I never used autofocus because the autofocus in that camera completely sucked. So when I was looking to upgrade, I wanted a camera that I could rely on in regards to autofocus. The FX3 has pretty much perfect autofocus. Take a look at this video and how the bride stays in focus the entire time. Number 14 is tally lights. Tally lights are probably one of the best features about this camera, and they have really saved me in crucial moments. They're located on the front, top, and back of the camera, while also illuminating the screen with a border to indicate that the camera is recording. When filming in such a fast-paced environment such as a wedding, you can't afford to miss a moment. So having these tally lights illuminate when you hit record will ensure that you're always filming when you want to be. Characteristic number 15 is no overheating. Without a doubt, this was one of the top things I needed in a reliable wedding video camera. I really wanted a camera that could film unlimitedly in 4K at 60 frames per second, and this one does it. Sony added a heat dissipation system using a cooling fan that keeps this camera cool even on the hottest days. I honestly never have to worry about this camera overheating. Alright, number 16 is full-sized HDMI. It's so unfortunate when good cameras don't come equipped with a full-size HDMI input. Micro HDMI is not super trustworthy because it's easy to break the cable, so I needed a camera with full-sized HDMI. for my monitor. Characteristic number 17 is a fully articulating screen. I would never buy a camera without this, and Sony was kind of late to the game to add this to their cameras, but I'm so glad they did, and the one on the FX3 is really great. Okay, reason number 18 is great audio options. This wasn't on the top of my priority list, but it is really valuable. Most of the time I only use audio from lavalier microphones, and sometimes I use the ambient noise that I can capture from on-camera microphones. The FX3, however, comes with an XLR adapter handle. Now this is a great option to have, even for weddings, considering that you can attach a great quality shotgun mic to this handle. But in my opinion, this is more useful for studio settings or corporate work. Nonetheless, this is incredible value and a huge win for wedding videographers. Now we're going to move on to the last two characteristics that I was looking for in an ideal camera, and the FX3 unfortunately doesn't come equipped with these. The first one I mentioned earlier in the video, and that is internal ND filters. For Sony to call this a cinema camera but leave out this feature is kind of shocking, but it isn't the worst feature to be left out. What I use in place of this are variable ND filters, which I put on the front of my lens. My favorite are the 2 to 5 and 6 to 9 stop variable ND filters from Freewell. Now the 20th and final characteristic that I was looking for in a camera that the FX3 unfortunately doesn't have is DCI 4K. I'm really surprised that this camera doesn't have Cinema 4K, which is a 4K resolution at 4096 by 2160 pixels. Though Ultra HD 4K is more than enough at 3840 by 2160 pixels, I would have loved if Sony included a DCI 4K option, but I do believe that they will add this in a future firmware update. So guys, now you know why I think the Sony FX3 is the best camera for wedding videography. I'm really curious to know if you agree with this, or if you think that a different camera would be a better option. Please let me know in the comment section. At the end of the day, none of the cameras that I listed are bad choices. Each camera has its own strengths and weaknesses, and cameras these days are so good. You want to make sure you choose a camera that fits your shooting style, and in my opinion, the FX3 is the king for wedding videography. Well, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I've included this camera and the rest of my gear in the description below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video.